We're back.
All right, so we're back, everybody, and we want to get into talking about the TV show or the Netflix series Stranger Things that sort of took the internet by storm this summer. I think everywhere in the alternative media, but also in just the normal people realms. Everybody seems to want to watch this and be wanting to talk about it, and it in our community, our alternative community, and we have a lot of people, MK Ultra connections in our community, there was a lot of discussion about this. People found it very interesting, and some of us found it very
triggering. Yeah.
Very triggering, from the story itself to the part that I think I struggled the most with, and I still think about the most, is that opening music and the credits and the way the red and the black lettering are brought in. But this is something that is touched on many, many levels. And for a lot of people, I have lots of friends who know nothing about MK Ultra. This is their first introduction to the idea that something like that exists. And it seems to be helping people to question things. I don't know if they're questioning the right way or not, but I think questioning is always good. And Robert has written an incredible series of articles. So 2 have come out so far. 3rd one is coming soon. Yes, Robert?
That's correct. It is.
And so the way he broke this down is just amazing. And as soon as Randy and I saw it, we were like, we definitely wanted, we were going to talk about Stranger Things anyway, but we definitely knew we wanted to talk about it with Robert. So
the other side of this is, and this goes into this whole season again, this summer, there's this whole summer movie season that's kind of like the other side of the clock from the the Christmas holiday film season. These are big box office seasons for the film industry. The big call for the summer season was supposed to be Suicide Squad, which is this very dark DC Comics adaptation starring Jason Leto returning and reprising the role of the Joker.
Jared Leto.
What did I say?
Jason Leto. It's
Jason
Leto.
Jared Leto.
Jared Leto.
Yes, I got that wrong. So Jared Leto kind of reviving the Joker franchise. We're coming off of Heath Ledger's, tragic comedy acting out of this. The Joker is an iconic figure. And the movie bombs. I mean, almost universally everybody said, this thing just sucked. And out of left field comes Stranger Things, which has just grabbed the imagination of a market that a lot of people either didn't know was there, or the market that spilled off of the discontent coming from a lack of films fueling into this kind of dark paranormal vein. So it's a very interesting, perfect storm, but this thing really has gripped the imagination of the listening public, to both mainstream and alternative as well.
I think it's gripped everyone, because whether they can recognize it on a conscious level or not, it has so many connects to reality through the storyline, but also to the people involved in the project. And I think it's, there's at least one little thing that in the show that everybody has something that touches them that comes from the show.
Exactly, yeah. And Robert hits a lot of these in his blog articles.
Robert does this better than anyone. Yes. So Robert, why don't you take us away and tell us all about Stranger Things?
Wow. Okay. Well, first of all, I think what we saw with Suicide Squad was kind of, I hope, the end of this egregious sort of illuminated, symbolic, mind screw or mind F. I'm trying to not use the word F anymore. I'm trying to hang, but you know what I'm saying? I mean, we have been so inundated.
I know.
And oversaturated with Illuminati, mind rot, symbolic mind rot. And it feels like Suicide Squad is kind of like the end of that sort of arc, that people are oversaturated with it. We've done it. It's over. We want something more organic, more ambient, more analog, and things that are beneath the surface. And Stranger Things is exactly that. It is. I mean, there is symbolism in Stranger Things. You have to go deeper for it. It's not a full frontal assault on your consciousness. And this is why I think it's been extremely powerful and effective in terms of grabbing people's attention. And and there is a reason why. And I'm going to get into this in a way that is very personal to me. And this is part of part 3, which I have not written about yet. And it has to do with the writer of Strange Things, or Stranger Things, whose last name is Gadjuzek. And I'm going to get into him in a moment. But let's just set the stage. Stranger Things is this really interesting kind of twin soul of another film that came out during the summer called Midnight Special, which will tie together because they both have two fairly interesting and supernatural children at the center of both films. One is a boy who goes by the name of Alton, or Al, A-L, if you want to break it down. And the other is a young woman by the name of 11, who goes by the name of Elle. And in both the movie and the Netflix teleseries, both children are being sought after by the government, which is really interesting. And not only by the government in Midnight Special, but also the church from which Alton has been liberated from by his father, played by Michael Shannon. So it is a theme that goes through both films, or the teleseries and the film. And both children are portrayed as being weaponized, meaning that they have abilities that transcend normal children. And not just abilities, but these are abilities that can be profound, larger than life, supernatural. So these children have been weaponized. And in Midnight Special, I don't want to give away too much, it appears as though Alton is kind of a glitch in the program, that he is almost like a walk-in child. He does not appear to be the subject of manipulation, psychic and psychological manipulation, although I'd have to go back and watch it again just to make sure. He feels like he's an aberration.
Yes, I got that too. A walk-in is actually a perfect way to put it, yes. Because he doesn't feel like he belongs there. He belongs somewhere else.
That's correct. Now, Elle, on the other hand, is manipulated. She is somebody who has become an experiment, and the experiment is being run by Matthew Modine's character named Dr. Brenner. And as a result, through a number of different things that he does with her, some of which we barely see. There are some, aspects to her where we're not really sure, what's going on behind the scenes, what else he's doing here, but clearly he has tapped into a level of psi power with her and is trying to exploit it. Brenner, of course, is a German name, and I think it is a cipher for a German scientist or a German researcher who came from Germany and Operation Paperclip, who, of course, had their fingerprints all over MK Ultra. So this is who Brenner, Matthew Modine, represents. But the thing about Stranger Things that I love is that there are so many arcs and so many storylines through that teleseries that are so wonderfully woven together. The loss of the sheriff's child and his girl, the loss of 11, the resurrection of 11, the loss of Will, and all these lives sort of colliding together, the loss of innocence in teenage, the loss of virginity. I mean, it's all about loss. It is all about, things, that go away, that disappear, that end. And that there is a really powerful quest, almost like a hero's journey in some ways, to resurrect those things and to bring them back to the surface. The one that makes every single character in Stranger Things face themselves. It's incredible writing. From a kind of a symbolic and quote-unquote MK Ultra perspective, one of the things that astrologically I tapped into was Pisces immediately, because when we deal with Pisces, we're dealing with, the underworld, not quite like the 8th house in Scorpio, but we're talking about, really deep zones of the underworld, like the zone that takes you out of this life. With the 8th house in Scorpio, there's a chance for resurrection. It's the shamanic journey. You come through the other side. With the 12th house, you don't always come back from the other side. In fact, you go to the other side and you hang out there for a few lifetimes. Who knows? I mean, that's the nature of Pisces and the 12th house. And when I got into this whole Piscean experience and just looking, at certain sort of certain clues and symbols inside of Stranger Things, there are two really pivotal moments that are incredibly Piscean in the film. I'm sorry, the teleseries. One is when Elle makes first contact with the underneath, the area that's below us, and she does it in a submersible tank.
Yeah.
Right. So here she goes into the Piscean realm. Here she drops into that Piscean space to make contact with what's underneath everything. And the second time it happens is when Jim and they set up the sensory deprivation swimming pool with the 1,500 pounds of salt. And again, it's that Piscean portal into this other dimension. So Pisces is a really powerful theme in Stranger Things. And then I looked at the young woman who plays Elle. Her name is Millie Bobby Brown. And it's Bobby, B-O-B-B-Y, not B-O-B-B-I-E, like Bobby Brown from, New Edition, which is kind of weird. But and then I looked at her astrology, and she was born at 0 degrees Pisces. 0 degrees Pisces. And you see this in movies quite a bit. If there is a theme in a movie, quite often actors who have a certain astrological assignation will be a part of that film. For instance, when you get into the Batman films, duality is all over Batman, and the number of people that are connected to the sign of Gemini in Batman are off the charts. So in Stranger Things, we have a character for 0 degrees Pisces. Now, look at her background. It's very unusual. So she's hanging out. She's British, by the way. Her parents are British. They're hanging out in Marbella, Spain. And, they're living there, and all of a sudden,
that's also an ocean reference.
What's that?
And that also is an ocean reference, Marbella. Beautiful ocean.
That's right. It is an ocean. That's right. That's true. And then they go to Orlando, Florida. Now, why would they go to
I know, this
Orlando,
is amazing.
Florida?
Mickey Mouse
Marbella. Now, okay, so check this out. Right, they're there for a brief period of time, not long at all. And she has a couple of drama coaches, and they say, well, your daughter is really, really good. She can play with, the big boys. You should go to Los Angeles. And then immediately they go to Los Angeles. So they go from Orlando, Disney Central, they go to L.A., and she's immediately cast as in a Disney production of Alice in Wonderland.
Of course.
Right? So that's her first role. So she's going through the looking glass. This is a theme for her personally.
Down the rabbit hole.
Down the rabbit hole. And okay, now, not only does she show up in Stranger Things, but she's also in a TV series in England called The Intruders, which is based upon a TV show from the 1960s that was all about aliens who occupy human bodies. And not only does this version of The Intruders have that theme associated with it, but it's also connected to a theme that's related to secret society. So her three main roles...
The Brill Society.
Yes. So her three main roles have been Alice Through the Looking Glass in the One in Wonderland, The Intruders, where there is this occupation of human bodies by aliens, and Elle in Stranger Things, where she becomes this weaponized, young woman who looks very androgynous, by the way.
Totally.
She's very, very androgynous and has an androgynous middle name. But so what is really going on here just with her? I mean, that's a story in and of itself, right?
Robert, just before we get away from that, I want to bring up two things. You're very well researched, so you may know this, but a topic of conversation a lot of times between Randy and I and between other people who have some background in MK or projects is the ability to breathe underwater, the memory of being put in those kinds of situations, as well as there being a level of androgyny to us, sort of a gender binding, a female inside of us and a male inside of us. And that seems to be a connecting theme between a lot of us. Like it seems to show up over and over in our discussions and whatnot. So you're hitting on two really important topics that strike right to the heart of what a lot of
the androgyny is the Kabbalistic ideal. It is the formative unsplit human before this cosmic divide occurred. So in a way, it's the unification of the two selves, or the embodiment and expression of both sexes. And when you look at this face of this actress in Stranger Things, that face doesn't really work as a female real well. It works semi-well as a male. And
She looks like River Phoenix. She looks a lot like River Phoenix.
Your first glance is that this is a young boy. It's very masculine. And I know we went through this whole wig thing and what they did there, which was almost like a drag queen effect in some ways. But on one level or another, she morphs in and out of this male-female dichotomy that's so strange. It's so visual that you can't help but think. I even went back, watched the whole series over again to see how much of this might have been lighting and makeup and things like that. And I have to tell you, it's really hard to tell, except that she seems to have the ability to somehow almost morph at times between these two gender expressions. Very strange stuff.
Yeah, well, that's zero Pisces, the most potent degree of Pisces, which is zero. It's like a portal, right? And when you're at the first degree of a sign, it is the most powerful manifestation of that sign. Now, I'm wondering, maybe she actually is a boy. Now, I haven't really thought about this before.
It's possible.
Maybe she is a boy. And what's and there's this whole, kind of layer of, deception or, kind of a mind shrew going on. Now, I'm not saying that she is, but I wouldn't rule out a possibility either. I mean, even with the name, she's got the middle name of a boy, B-O-B-Y.
They're throwing it in people's faces. Whether she is or she isn't the issue. But they're gender screwing. That's part of what this whole trend is.
There's a deliberate ambiguity here.
It's all about confusing people's idea of what is what. And so whether she's a boy or a girl or she's both, on a certain level, all humans are intersexed, some to more degrees than others. But instead of having a sane, rational, mature discussion about this, they just throw this out in a way that is really confusing and disorienting to most people, particularly those who don't have levels of knowledge about these things.
Well, and it reminds me a lot of what David Bowie was doing back in the early 70s.
Yeah.
Where he was actually going off on this kind of polysexual, bisexual kind of male-female switch-off thing that he was doing, which was actually sitting at the center of a sexual revolution anyway. You had the women's liberation movement, the gay liberation movement. You had the 70s, which was this real theatrical form of rock and roll that became very esoteric in expressions of sexuality and occult symbology, all of this in music coming off of the 60s. So, in a way, this is a kind of like a theatrical presentation that's bringing something out of the subconscious of the human collective unconscious, I think.
Well, it's interesting you brought up Bowie because I've seen interviews. I'm sure you have too, Granny. I know you're a real Bowie file where he talks about this openly during that phase, during that cycle, and he says, I've studied this, and quite a few shamans throughout various cultures of the world tend to be androgynous and bisexuals. And he's bringing this up, and he's making a kind of an interesting point. Because if that is indeed the case, and if that is true, the shaman is the person inside the tribe or the group that has a connection to the supernatural and can break away from temporal reality because he's not rooted generally, or she's not rooted to an identity or to a fixture inside of a household structure. So, Bowie's actually, I think, speaking some truth in that instance, and he was actually being quite revelatory in a lot of ways. And what was also happening in the 60s, you had somebody like, what's her name? The model, Lulu, right? Who was very male. She had really short hair.
Twiggy. It was Twiggy.
Twiggy.
Yeah.
Twiggy had incredibly short. She was coming at the androgyny from a different perspective. Now, this may all be Tavistock, right?
Well, if you
Tavistock programming.
If you go look at
time,
I'm sorry.
at the same time, it does converge with this Gnostic or this Kabbalistic version of the androgyne
Yeah.
and the perfected being and the rejoining of the masculine and feminine.
I'll tell you, there's a very high sort of spiritual thing that happens when one recognizes their own androgyny. And, I'll just share, I had a very strange experience one time. A lot of my experiences come when I'm dancing, because that's like when I really just tune into the universe. And I was in this party, this really interesting room that had all rounded edges. That's perfect for sound. So it kind of encapsulated in sound. And I was having this experience where I kept looking over to the other side of the room, and I saw someone that looked almost exactly like me, but a little more masculine, like a male. Okay. And I kept trying to go over and look at him, but whenever I crossed over to that side of the room, he would cross over to the side that I just came from. And this, I could never be on the same side of the room as him. And at a certain point, I realized that we were wearing the same thing, and that I was outside of myself and looking at the male and the female part of myself. And
Wow.
it completely changed how I viewed myself and the world. And I think I think it took me a while to completely understand the experience and to own it. But it made me comfortable with things about myself that maybe I hadn't been comfortable with before. And it also, I think, helped me, to not ever be tricked by all of this nonsense going on with the gay agenda and the transgender agenda and all that. I see it for what it is. And I can't explain it. It's one of the most powerful spiritual experiences that I've ever had. And so, yes, there is something to that I think is being tapped into. There's the bullshit part that is a Tavistock program, but they only do that when they're trying to distract people from something that exists, that is a real, true, important, esoteric, organic knowledge kind of thing.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Absolutely. One of the things that's interesting about Stranger Things, connecting it back to Midnight Special, is there are characters in both films named Lucas, which I found fascinating.
Yeah.
In Stranger Things, Lucas his name is Lucas Sinclair. Okay, and Sinclair is the name of the family that essentially started Freemasonry in Scotland when the Freemasons went to Scotland and left the south of France.
Rosalind Chapel.
So Rosalind Chapel. So Sinclair or Saint Clair, or the Saint of Clarity or Clear Light, is part of his name. He's Lucas. He is the light bringer, and he is the one member of their little group that's rebellious, right? Of the three boys, he's the one that starts a fight. He's the one that starts a ruckus, and he has to come back together with the other little boy. His name is, what's it, Mark? Is that his name? Is that his name, Mark?
Yeah, they got in a fight. Yeah.
Yeah. So he plays the role of the rebel, right? That's who he is. And, and the name Lucas, Lightbearer, connected to Lucifer.
Lucifer, the ultimate rebel, according to Saul Alinsky or whatever. Yeah.
That's right. Now you go into Midnight Special, and Roy, who plays the father of Alton, he grabs his buddy, who's a state trooper, but decides he's going to help Roy. His name is Lucas, and he's the kind of the rebellious one inside of that sort of trinity between Roy and himself and Alton. He breaks ranks with order. He breaks ranks with his state trooper brother. And at one point, he tries to intervene. I don't want to get too much right about the movie. He tries to intervene and is not successful. And to some extent, maybe the blood of the moment is on his hands. Maybe not. Don't know. But here we have another Lucas. So they're converging through both of these movies, which I thought to be quite interesting. Now, we get into Winona Ryder. And Winona Ryder plays the mother of Will, a boy who disappears at the beginning of Stranger Things, and he's connected to Eleven.
Wasn't her first movie Lucas?
What's that?
Wasn't Winona Ryder's first movie Lucas?
Yes, this is what I was going to get to.
Okay.
So Lucas is Winona Ryder's first movie.
Wow.
The first movie she did was Lucas. And guess who's in Lucas? Corey Haim, who is, of course, one of the poster boys for pedophilia, child abuse, and perhaps MK Ultra manipulation. We don't know. She's in that movie with him. Very, very interesting. Charlie Sheen is also in that movie, by the way. Lucas.
Yeah. Wow.
So now we've got another Lucas reference, right? Her first movie. And her father happens to be Michael Horowitz. That's Winona Ryder's last name. Winona Horowitz. Michael Horowitz is he's the guy that's in charge of Timothy Leary's papers, all of his books, his letters. And Timothy Leary is Winona Ryder's godfather. Timothy Leary was the grand wizard, the grand social wizard of MK Ultra, because MK Ultra happened on an individual level and on a collective level, right? So they were basically traumatizing and collectively distorting, shaping, and remaking an entire generation, while also doing it individually with children at the same time. So it was happening at a lot of different levels. And Timothy Leary's right in the mix, right? And
LSD.
he's Winona Ryder's godfather. Yeah, LSD. I mean, he's her godfather for God's sake, right?
Yeah.
So now let's fast forward, okay? Let's get into Polly Klaas, because Polly Klaas is a mirror of Lucas, of Will in some ways, although a much more tragic representation. Polly Klaas was abducted on October 3rd, 1993. And she was taken by a guy by the name of Richard Allen Davis out of her home in Petaluma, California. It was very strange. Richard Allen Davis, who's a monster, a career criminal. He has a rap sheet that is the equivalent of the Old Testament. I mean, it's huge, right? It's long. And so Richard Allen Davis goes into Polly Klaas's house, and she's there. She's having a sleepover with some girls. Her mom is home, and Richard Allen Davis says, "Which one of you is Polly?" He doesn't even know who Polly is. And somehow he figures out who Polly is, and he takes her. And here we go. Now, Richard Allen Davis plays the role of the Octagorgon. He is the monster, right? He's the monster, the Octagorgon, who takes Polly Klaas into the Upsidedown. This is exactly what he does. This is exactly who he is. But then what happens after that is very bizarre. Because on that, it was the day after, I believe, or it might have been that night, but Richard Allen Davis was pulled over by Petaluma police.
And there's the police right behind you, just in sync.
Yeah, so he's pulled over by Petaluma police, and he's got a six-pack, an open six-pack, on his front seat. He's obviously inebriated. Now, at what point have you ever met a cop who did not recognize the opportunity to bring your ass in for a DUI, get a little brownie point, a little merit badge, and get some revenue for the city and the county? When has that ever happened? I mean, if you're connected and maybe you've got a Freemasonic ring, it might happen, okay? But clearly, they had a chance to have a caller, and they did not do anything with him. And then they said during the trial, the testimony, that their radio was broken. So they couldn't call it in. They couldn't call in his license. They couldn't figure out that this guy had warrants, was a career criminal. They didn't know that there was an APB for Polly Klaas. So here's this moment in time where, theoretically, it all kind of goes wrong. It's just a bunch of really bad, mistakes and errors all happening coincidentally. Did they really happen coincidentally? Or was something else going on there? Were these two cops in the know? Did they understand who Richard Allen Davis was? Now, I've heard and read things that they saw what Richard Allen Davis was doing, that apparently they came upon the scene and they saw him raping Polly Klaas. This is what I've read. Whether it's true or not, I can't validate that, but I've read it. And if you look at all the evidence that sort of is amassed there, that there's an open container, that he's stinking drunk, that they have a broken radio, that something went on there that does not, pass the eye test.
Yep.
So then Richard Allen Davis goes free. He's later arrested, and he's in incarceration until December, where he theoretically tells them where Polly's body is, okay? Theoretically. Now, in between October and December, Mark Klaas comes on. Mark Klaas is Polly's father. Polly, obviously, is a divorce situation. Mark does not live at home with her. He runs a rental car franchise in Petaluma, and he storms onto the scene like he's George S. Patton. I mean, this guy he has absolutely zero grief, zero sadness, zero sense that his daughter is never going to come back. All you see with him is cold steel, fury, and rage. And I didn't know much about this when we're talking about 1993, but I could read people really well. And I looked at him and said, something's wrong with this guy. He is not having an appropriate response to what's happening here. And so I began to distrust him immediately. And I also never saw the mother. And I thought, well, what's going on with the mother? Something's not right here. So Polly Klaas and Winona Ryder come together because Winona Ryder is from Petaluma. And she emerges very early on in the Polly Klaas disappearance. And I think even offered $200,000 for the whereabouts of Polly Klaas. You know, and she's all over the news. And of course, she's got this weird background with Timothy Leary and Michael Horowitz and the 60s and LSD and MK Ultra, and who knows what's in her closet, right? So she's got that kind of baggage. And so now we've got these strange worlds coming together. And Polly Klaas's remains were found in, I think it was December 8th, if I'm not mistaken, of that year, so almost 2 months. And, you know, theoretically, Richard Allen Davis confessed. I'm not sure he really did. I mean, this guy is completely bifurcated. He smashed the smithereens. He's a Gemini, by the way. And is he really capable of sharing this, or what really went on? They find her remains. They're almost unrecognizable. Apparently, Polly's jaw was completely removed. So there's no dental forensics. Remember that. No dental forensics. Mark Klaas and the mother never identified the body. They never looked at the body, never saw the body. So theoretically, case closed. Richard Allen Davis, monster, rapes her, destroys her, boom, done. Right? Of course, he's going to be incarcerated. He's got the death penalty. Case closed. Mark Klaas starts the Polly Klaas Foundation, starts to get all this money, and becomes a cause celeb. Now, what's really kind of another weird story is Mark Klaas's father, Joe Klaas. Joe Klaas has a background in the military. But he was a long-time Army guy, spent a lot of time in the Army. And then when he got out of the Army, he was in World War II, he gets into the media, and he has a talk show up in Alaska. And then he's got, what else? He was working with ABC, which has been a known CIA front for many, many years. And Joe Klaas writes this book about Amelia Earhart and how Amelia Earhart has gone missing, but he meets this strange guy who had been in an insane asylum and has this very unusual tale to tell about how Amelia Earhart isn't really missing and that she has this whole other life after the remains of her plane were found in the Sierra Nevadas. And it's very bizarre. It's like, why is he writing about this? You know, why is he writing about the disappearance of this woman who has this other life somewhere else being kind of recounted to him by somebody who's clinically insane? It's very unusual. And there's an image I have up on my website of Joe Klaas and Winona Ryder together during the early days of the Polly Klaas disappearance. So Polly Klaas, fast forward 2006, I'm at a music festival in Santa Rosa. As I'm leaving, there's this guy passing out papers. And he shows me this, and I take one, and I look at it. It's got Polly Klaas information all over it. And I said, what happened to her? I said, I know the official story is not the official story at all. He says, you're right. I'm a private detective. I've been on this case for years. And I'll tell you what happened. And he lays out a gruesome tale about what happened to her and that she was part of a 3-day ritual, which is so gruesome and horrific that I don't want to get into the details, but it just involves torture. And that they were able to videotape and capture this ritual and then sell it to people, right? So it's a really very dark, very heavy scenario for this young girl. Now, in that area, in that Petaluma area, is, of course, Bohemian Grove, right? Bohemian Grove. So we have Bohemian Grove, not far from Petaluma. What goes on there? Like, Who's been through Bohemian Grove? Rumor has it Beyonce's been there. Rihanna's been there. Justin Timberlake's been there. You know, it's like it's a name call. It's a checklist of Bohemian Grove.
Alex Jones has been there.
Alex Jones, exactly. So here we have now we have Winona Ryder playing the mother of a missing girl in Stranger Things. And this
Missing
whole
boy.
MK Ultra, missing boy. I'm sorry, missing boy in Stranger Things. Right, I got confused with Elf. So we have this weird layer upon layer upon layer of, you know, sort of missing children, abducted children, MK Ultra, experimentation, ritual, and there's another layer which I haven't talked about, which I want to talk about now. I haven't shared this with anybody and haven't written about it yet, but I will in the third installment. The writer of Missing Things, his last name is Gadzuzek. Gadzuzek. I think it might be Robert, if I'm not mistaken. You can look it up. But I thought, well, this is a really unusual name. I only know one other Gadzuzek in my life, and that was my English teacher from college, Robin Gadzuzek. And sure enough, Robin is Robert's father, okay?
Wow.
So I had his father as an English teacher in college, and I took Hemingway from his father. And his father was always talking about Hemingway as being 1/3 above the surface and 2/3 below the surface, that Hemingway's writing was like an iceberg. This is the creative spine or the creative milieu for Stranger Things. What we see above the surface is 1/3, what's below the surface is 2/3. He took this right out of his father's sort of his mind. Robin Gadzuzek was an amazing teacher. He talked about the balance and the rectification of the Apollonian, the Dionysian, and he could break Hemingway down like nobody's business. It's incredible. Now, what was interesting for me was that during that time in my life, I swear to God, I was initiated into out-of-body experience by Hemingway. Now, this sounds really bizarre, but I was sleeping one night, and I had this dream about these lions. And then I had this blow to my head, and I swear to God it was Hemingway. And from that moment forward, I started to have out-of-body experiences. And then I read that Hemingway, during the Spanish War, when he was doing his Red Cross trip, was also having out-of-body experiences. This is what happened to him, which is why he was an insomniac. Okay, now I'm going to bring it back to Stranger Things. Here's where it gets really weird, okay? Robin Gadzuzek's brother is Daniel Gadzuzek. Daniel Gadzuzek is a Nobel Prize-winning scientist. Daniel Gadzuzek discovered prions. If you don't know what prions are the inorganic life forms.
Prion disease.
That prion disease.
Mad cow.
That create mad cow.
Oh my God.
Critchfield, yeah.
Okay, now it's going to get even weirder, all right? You know how he discovered this is Gadzuzek. This is his uncle, Daniel. He discovered it by going to, I think it's either New Guinea or Borneo, and people were dying there because they have these funerary rites where they eat the dead. They consume the dead body so the body can go back into the tribe, right? Well, they were dying of mad cow disease. And so he discovers prions amongst these people, this tribe. Now, here's what he does. He decides that he's going to take about 25 boys back to the United States with him. And he takes them back to the United States, and guess what happened? He winds up molesting these boys, 7 of them, on the record. He winds up going to prison for child molestation, okay?
Oh, my God.
And this is Gadzuzek's uncle. I mean, this guy is a big deal, and you don't know, I don't know what, so let's say you're the government, and he discovers prions. If you're the government, aren't you interested in that? Like, really, what can these prions do for us? Where can we go with this prion thing, man? Because that's where their head goes. So Gadzuzek winds up doing, I think, 15 years in jail, if I'm not mistaken. But here we have another case of children that are removed from their home. I mean, in this case, it's legal, right, theoretically, taken all the way across the world, making a Piscean journey across a body of water, and theoretically, the United States is the upside
down.
Of Borneo, New Guinea, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it is the other world.
Yep.
So here's another layer of Stranger Things that comes through the writer of the script. Is mind-blowing. Absolutely mind-blowing. That's really what I'm talking about on the third installment of this thing.
Wow. Okay, Robert. So there's a bunch of strings there that I need to, I just wasn't expecting that, what you dropped at the end. And I have a major connection to what you just talked about, but I want to stop
that's
somewhere
off
else.
scale.
I mean, it's just, that's crazy. And when you hear what I have to say, that'll get even crazier. But I want to start back with the polyclass thing for a second, because you and I talked about this a bit last week, and I had said I was going to do some research, and I talked to a friend who told her what we were going to talk about, and she recommended that I look into somebody named Peter Chernoff. And Peter Chernoff is kind of a confusing character. He is an MK Ultra whistleblower, but he's interesting because he apparently was in jail for some reason and started fasting while he was in jail and lost about 50 pounds. And when that happened, he started having flashbacks and memories and came to the realization that he had worked as a person worked for like Bekabal or Akabal, worked as a person who was charged with kidnapping these children to be taken to ritual sacrifices. And he specifically speaks of kidnapping a child named Kevin Collins, who was taken to a ritual sacrifice that apparently George Bush was involved in.
Yep.
The friend who told me about this felt that he had mentioned some other children's name, and she thought maybe one of the children's name had been polyclass. She wasn't sure. She recommended I look into it. So I did some research and different ways of searching for things. And when I would search their names in different kinds of connections, their names, Polyclass and Peter Chernoff, would come up in the same documents. I couldn't find a direct link to anything he said about having kidnapped Polyclass or being involved in that. But in a lot of a good portion of these documents, it would be mentioned that he was from Petaluma. And it was an area that he ended up going to the police and trying to tell, basically confessing that he had been kidnapping children, and this Kevin Collins kidnapped other children, and he was trying to confess to a crime, and they were like, they ended up filing a restraining order against him to keep him away from the police station, so he couldn't keep coming in there and telling them that this was going on and that he had been part of this. And this mention of him living in the mention of Polyclass being from Petaluma and him being from Petaluma comes up in these same articles where there's the link between him and this Kevin Collins kid. Now, there were a lot of articles that were, when I researched those names together, that were dead, links that were dead, deleted, destroyed. I wonder if there was something else there. So I can't say that he was in any way involved with the Polyclass thing, but here's somebody whistleblowing and trying to confess to being involved in a kidnapping ring in that area of the country that kidnaps children to take them to satanic rituals. And so I think that's a really interesting tie-in with what you were just talking about. My intuition and some things that I did research into many years back led me to believe that Polyclass had been taken to something like Bohemian Grove and sacrificed. I don't know that.
Yeah.
But my intuition said that. And so what you say goes along with that. And then this other thing is awfully interesting when you put these together. The next thing, what you just said about, God, I almost had to get up and go to the bathroom because I'm having one of those physical reactions I've talked about being.
I saw you going through that. That's on camera.
So what you said about the mad cow thing. So my she's a cousin, we called her an aunt. I'm going to leave names out of this. Was the first known American to contract mad cow disease. They were calling it Creutzfeldt-Jakob then.
Right.
Yep. And she died of it. And I've always there's a lot of strange things in my family and the things that around my family. But when you just said that when you brought that whole thing up and the way all these things tie, and I know, I mean, I remember like during this period of time this was going on, and they're trying to figure out what had happened. And if I'm remembering correctly, they had traced it to her contracting of it somehow to possibly time she'd spent overseas or whatever. I don't know. But as far as I understand it, and I could be wrong about the details, but what I understood at the time, and this was many years ago now, she was the first known American to contract it.
Wow.
And is that crazy? I had no idea you were going to bring that up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that is very weird. You know, that is very, very strange. And I haven't really gone into this sort of iteration of Stranger Things because it's very strange, right?
I'm shaking right now.
The guy who wrote this, his uncle discovered prions and took 25 young boys to the United States and then sexually violated a number of them. Very, very unusual. It's another sort of dark layer to this whole thing. And, what is he trying to communicate?
Is that like making communicate, but also is there like some aspect of the molestation that is like a blessing or a spell to put on this disease to sort of like what you're talking about that then relates to it being manipulated and is mad cow disease? And, and this also in some weird way that I can't completely understand, but when I think about these things, they always come together, also relates to cattle mutilation that goes on. But like, what is this? What is mad cow disease? What are these cattle mutilations about? Is there some kind of, there's obviously like a physical scientific explanation on a certain level, but is there some kind of dark, esoteric, black magic?
Yes, the answer to that is yes.
That is, because there's something very strange about the mad cow disease. I mean, this is something that is like it's almost like alien comes into the body. It's like, the person.
Well, let me close the loop for you here. You may remember my interview with Harold Katzavella, the German researcher who was doing the work on the black goo.
Right.
Harold's original research was based on mad cow disease.
Really?
And the prions and what was going on. It arced off into chemtrails and ultimately wound up connecting into
Morgellons
and the alien black goo substance. So, I mean, for the listeners and viewers out there, that's a whole other arc of research that we have no time to go into on this show.
Yeah, but I mean, this is just crazy.
There are, because there's threads that run through all of this, and you have to choose well which you're going to weave into a tapestry of a narrative. So,
yeah.
But there are connective aspects to all of this. Are we going to talk at all about about what we talked about with Miranda Kelly, Cobain?
There was also the other thing that when I first saw your article, Robert, and when you and I were talking about the connection between Polyclass and Winona Ryder, I recall that back many years ago when I was just a listener, to Off Planet Radio, there was an interview that Randy had done with Duncan and Miranda, where Miranda and I might be, it was many years ago, and we were not able to find the clip to verify the exact words. So I'm paraphrasing here, and I could have some of the small details wrong. But I recall her saying something about having a memory or remembering being at Stanford Research Institute and Kurt Cobain was there, and he was in some tremendous kind of pain. They were doing something to him that was awfully painful. But in between that, they were talking, and that he was talking about the song Polly being about Polyclass, and that the song was written before the thing happened with Polyclass.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
There's a whole.
It wouldn't surprise me at all.
Well, and listeners can go online. We'll throw some links up with this. But if you go look at the lyrics to Polly, this song is ritualistic torture. And, we pretty much know that most of these rock stars, the big ones, have been through some kind of mind control program. I mean, I've linked it with David Bowie, Peter Gabriel, I believe even John Lennon. A lot of these rock stars have gone through some kind of MK Ultra type mind control program. But the first line of the lyrics to Polly goes, "Polly wants a cracker. I think I should get her off first. I think she wants some water to put out the blowtorch." There's a whole language here that goes into ritualism.
Yep.
And anybody that pulls the lyrics up, it's very violent. It's sexually very, actually filthy.
Yeah.
And it goes, let me take a ride. Don't cut yourself. I want some help to please myself. There's this whole riff that goes through this. We were talking off the air before Robert came back on tonight, and I was saying to Emily about how a lot of this stuff is time loops that are being played, because on top of MK Ultra and Mind Control, they also were running these programs that were oriented around various programs for time stream manipulation. Mm-hmm. So theoretically, in the world, and we've seen this, we've seen the mirror images that come up in rock lyrics, movie images, and things like that. So they're playing with time, they're playing with images. This actually shows up in an article that I wrote years ago about the Batman shooting in Colorado.
Yeah.
And there with time stream manipulation. So none of this is out of the pale. It's wild, it's exotic, and yeah, we're pulling threads out of it, but it helps to inform a background discussion, which brings us back into Stranger Things. And
these are the strangest things.
It was when we left off.
I don't know that we can get any stranger than the things we just talked about. How about you guys?
Well, okay, I want to throw in another little reference here to Winona Ryder and her father, Michael Horowitz. Michael Horowitz is planning to do a film, a biopic, in conjunction with Leonardo DiCaprio on Timothy Leary, and I think Timothy Leary will be played by Leonardo DiCaprio. So they're this is quote unquote in the works. And the guy that they've hired to write this is a guy by the name of Craig Lucas. And here's his name Lucas again, right? Now, Craig Lucas, this guy, I mean, his story is utterly bizarre. So his story is that he was in a car as a baby in Atlanta, right? In Atlanta. He's in a car, he's a baby, and these two people walk by, and they see him, and they decide that they're going to take him, or call the cops or whatever, right? So eventually, this baby, Craig Lucas, winds up in the hands of these two people. One of them happens to be an FBI agent, right? So how does this work, right? I'm just trying to figure this out. You're walking down the street in Atlanta, here we go, here for an FBI convention. Oh, look, there's a car. There's a baby in the car.
Damn.
Hey, honey, let's take it.
We be childish.
Dog. Hey, let's take it. I mean, weird. I mean, the whole thing is, so now he's raised by this FBI agent. So it's so strange. So now we've got Craig Lucas going to write the biopic of Timothy Leary, Winona Ryder's godfather. And of course, not very far from Petaluma, what do we have? We have George Lucas and Skywalker Ranch.
Industrial light and magic.
Exactly. All in that little area there, Petaluma, Bohemian Grove. I've been there, by the way. I've been to Lucas Ranch. I've taken the tour. I've been in the soundstage. Pretty impressive place, to be honest with you. So all these strange threads that are coming forward. So are we talking about predictive programming, hidden in plain sight, revelation of the method? I think it's a little bit of all of it, to be honest with you.
Okay, and let me pull the threads a little more. So just when I was doing some research about the Duffer Brothers, we talked about maybe me looking into them a little bit. I couldn't find too much stuff, but one of the things that I did find is that they had originally intended on calling this program Montauk and shooting it in Long Island, but they decided it would be too difficult and too expensive to do the shoot there. And then they decided they wanted it to be more like the surroundings they grew up in. They grew up in North Carolina, and they happened to be working on some other thing in Atlanta. And they decided that Atlanta would be a good place to shoot this, which is where it's shot. So it's shot in Atlanta, which is where Craig Lucas was found in a car by the FBI agent. So there's another weird circle. The other thing me and Randy were talking about, and this is a little off, but since we're going about to all these weird loops, they talked about how, they were very successful in this. They really wanted it to have that feel and be able to bring in the movies that they were affected by when they were children, like E.T. and Stand By Me. And if you think about Stand By Me, these children actors are almost like, that's what it is. They ring the same bell as those child actors in Stand By Me. Elle looks like River Phoenix. I just made that connection today. but they did a really good job at capturing that Stand By Me kind of feeling. And think of all the tragedy that's happened around that film as well, okay? So pull on those threads. But then the final thing is that me and Randy and a lot of people who are floating in our part of the alternative media, not the patriot government, whatever, but people who are talking about projects and programs, like, we're interested in them, we're looking at them, and through the course of this, we're finding out and revealing our own MK Ultra stories. Is that's what's going on with these people too? The thing with Craig Lucas sounds like exactly how somebody gets pulled into an MK Ultra program.
Absolutely.
Okay, so is this what we're doing, that we've been doing for years here now on this small scale? Have we actually poked through enough that it's happening on this broader mass scale now? I mean, if you look, starting back with Twin Peaks and then X-Files and then onto programs like Fringe, Person of Interest,
Lost,
Blacklist, Stranger Things, all of these programs are about MK Ultra. They look like they're about something else, but when you really watch and with informed eyes and having done research on it, they're revealing the program. And it's like, is it predictive programming?
It's revelation of the method.
It's revelation of the method. Is it
revelation method.
Is it containment? Are they trying to, they know that the truth is coming, so they're trying to package it in a way that people say, oh, that was just in the movies, that's not real, whatever. What is it? But it's spilling out everywhere. Sense8 is another one. Everybody wants to talk about, ultimately, their experience in MK Ultra. I mean, like, that's what's going on here.
It's also a very long arc. Let me close the loop on something that Robert brought up, which goes back to Winona Ryder, her connection to Timothy Leary, and this movie that's going to come out with DiCaprio on Leary. So you have Winona Ryder, whose godfather is Timothy Leary. Timothy Leary is in Millbrook in the 1960s doing the first acid test with Ralph Metzner and Richard Alpert, who later became Baba Ram Dass. Well, behind the scenes of this, and this is where the Illuminati aspect comes in, and this is provable because I have the oral history from an eyewitness. The Millbrook experiment was funded by a woman named Peggy Hitchcock, a Mellon heiress,
who is
married to Walter Boert, the author of the book Operation Mind Control, which Emily and I both know James Martinez, who was Walter Boert in his last year's intellectual heir, who related a lot of stories of this. So just take those degrees of separation back now and tell me that it's an accident, that we're talking about Stranger Things and Midnight Special and all of these themes that are rippling through all of this, that have gone through all these TV shows, all of these movies, all these connect the dots kind of things that you could just flowchart endlessly for hours. We
are living Operation Mind Control.
We literally are. We're inside of the system that they created out of this, which goes back, obviously to, again, Stranger Things. You have a composite of you and Cameron, Dr. Green, who was Sidney Gottlieb. You have all of these dark Nazi figures that basically emerged out of World War II and then morphed into what by the 60s became a counterculture, which is now spun all of this stuff off.
Yeah.
So,
and Robert, also, I don't know how much you know about Walter Boert or his book Operation Mind Control, but one of the most important things he reveals in his book is having been dosed with a very strong kind of acid that sent him on a 40-day acid trip in which he was bilocating, which he I believe means that he was in multiple places at one time.
Yeah.
So again, this is a result of acid, and some people did this to him. It wasn't something he took intentionally. It was something that was done to him, and his life was never the same after that. And
that particular experience included him basically having contact with extra-dimensional alien-type creatures as well. He related that to James. I mean, this was an acid trip on steroids. It was, probably one of the ultimate acid trips to a man who basically was the publisher of the East Village Other, the first underground newspaper of major distribution in a metropolitan area in New York City. And Walter Bellert has people coming to him, guys coming out of Vietnam that are going, man, some shit happened over there. I can't explain it. I mean, Walter actually, in his later years, regretted writing the book. He didn't feel like he addressed it at the level that he wanted to because he wanted to help people. But basically, what had happened was that he had just swerved into what was really going on in Vietnam, which was in Vietnam. They were running the early stages of MK Ultra there as well.
Phoenix and stuff, Phoenix program and all that kind of
Phoenix
stuff.
program.
And you're Robert Phoenix, so here we are. We've come another full circle.
We've pulled you so far off your thread at this point. We can only hope you can recover from this.
Oh yeah, I could come back. I could find the signal.
Find the thread, man. Thread the needle.
So do we want to talk a little bit about Midnight Special?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things that intrigued me about Midnight Special and Stranger Things, obviously, was the two children. So we have the masculine and the feminine, the L and the Al, 11 and Alton. And then we have the two connecting Lucas characters in both films. And then in Midnight Special, Alton talks about a world that's above us and that he's not from here and he's from the world above. And in Stranger Things, Elle talks about the upside down.
Yep.
So we have essentially kind of an Oreo cookie of reality when you put the two films together. And you have sort of this earth plane that we're on, and then there is the upside down or an alternate reality or a hell realm beneath us, and then another world above us. And Emily and I were talking about this, and it calls into question sort of the reality of the earth in general. And, you know, what if there is another kind of world above us? What if we are in some version of inner earth or middle earth? Now, I'm just speculating here, but from a Gnostic perspective, the as above, so below, and the conjoining of these two films creates a particular layer or version of reality that is quite unusual and kind of cuts against the grain of what we think we're in, to be honest with you.
Well,
Very interesting when you put them together.
Duncan always said we're in Midgard.
Yes, yeah, that's what you and I were talking about.
Yeah.
Fine. Yeah.
It shows up recurrently in this in a theme in the TV series Fringe.
Yep.
Joshua Jackson's character Peter talks about the world on the bottom of the lake being the parallel universe that he came from. Then, and it's funny because I was interacting with a group of people on Facebook, and somebody brought to my remembrance a very old connection back to the 1960s, and it's episode 157, the final episode of Rod Serling's Twilight Zone. It's called The Bewitching Pool, and it has two children who swim down to the bottom of their swimming pool. They're from a very affluent American family. They swim to the bottom of the pool, go to the other side of the portal, and wind up in a land that looks like a chapter out of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. So we just seem to have this meshing kind of reality stream of above, the underworld, all of this kind of seamlessly flowing together, and then the veil rending and we being able to somehow travel back and forth between these different realms.
Yeah. I mean, I think what it's also doing is it's opening our consciousness. And maybe this is part of the MK Ultra program, you know, the extension of it, or, you know, the revelation of the method. But here we are. I mean, we're entering into some really interesting territory about the nature of reality and how the nature of reality bleeds through cinema and television and time and timelines and even the physical nature of reality. I mean, I think it's really, really fascinating in a lot of ways. And to some extent, because it's open-ended, we're kind of in this astro-sync universe, so this synchronistic universe, which is entirely open-ended. I kind of like it because we're not assigning, to some extent, you know, meaning on the value, like it's either good or bad or right or wrong. We do know that abducting children is not cool, man. I mean, come on, desecration of innocence. Nobody wants to go through it. Nobody wants to have their kid go through it. Nobody's advocating it. I'm not advocating torture. I'm not advocating any of this darkness. But at the same time, we're opening up to some very interesting dialogues about the nature of who we are, where we are, and what this is all about. And I think it's far more complex than any of us can wrap our heads around. That's my 2 cents.
I agree. I mean, like, I sometimes ask myself, what is this? Like, this, everything about the reality, like, what the hell is this? It's very complex, and there's no, like, every time I think I have something about it figured out, something happens that makes me go, I have no idea what the hell's going on. But I think it's fascinating. I enjoy looking at it, and I certainly love speaking about it with people like you guys. So, yeah.
So did we get through the heart of what you were bringing out, what you wanted to bring out on this show about these two, they're 2 films, basically. One's a series, one's a film, Midnight Special and Stranger Things.
Yeah, I think I think so. You know, and what I'm trying to put together is that there's this kind of alchemical formula with the 2 movies that brings everything together in some way, in a very unique and interesting pattern, from the masculine and the feminine to as above, so below. In Midnight Special, there's a religious component to Midnight Special.
Yeah.
Very much.
So you get like what Jose Arguelles talks about in his Meditations of Paco Votan. He talks about the people of the book versus the people of the rainbow, right?
Yeah.
So the people of the book show up in Midnight Special, and the people of the rainbow show up in Stranger Things.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, because there's kind of a rainbow sort of assemblage of characters and personae, and they are not played by the book. Whereas in Midnight Special, it's all about the book, the little interpretation of the book, to some extent even the breakaway from the book. So you put them together, and there's kind of this sort of macro holism between the 2 films that brings together kind of an interesting balancing of reality. And we're about to move into Jupiter in Libra, where some of these things are going to start to come into balance. You know, the masculine and the feminine, and this whole concept and notion of androgyny, you know, where, you know, it could be a very interesting kind of sexual miscegenation where, you know, men come through a more feminine period and integrate that, and now they're more balanced, and women come through a more masculine period and maybe they're more balanced. So astrologically, it has some import as well. So we're, you know, certainly we're living in very interesting times, and the 2 films, I think, bridge this potentiality. And what's really kind of cool about both films, even though there's a dark, I'm not going to spoil, there's a little dark patch at the end of Stranger Things, but there is a sense of victory in both films. There is a sense of resolution in both films, which to me kind of harkens back to the old days in Hollywood, where kind of you put the monster back in the box for the most part, and that there's a heroic act that takes place, even though, again, there's an asterisk for Stranger Things. That's all I'm going to say. But there is this semblance of completion with both films. And not that we need to have a happy ending or a sense of a story that's fully complete, but, you know, we've been living through a very fragmented period, and these 2 films sort of wrap together in this holistic package in, I think, a very cool kind of way. And the other thing, too, is that when you look at the age of the children in Midnight, and by the way, Midnight Special, even though it's contemporary, has a very 1980s feel about it.
Yes.
Like you look at the car that the main characters are driving. It's from the late 70s.
Yeah.
You know, and
the decor of the
Stranger Things,
houses and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And Stranger Things happens in the 1980s. So from a timeline perspective, it's a throwback. And we don't have enough time to get into the 1980s. But the 1980s were hijacked. The
Totally.
1980s
Absolutely.
they were supposed to be like the 60s, but at a different level. And they were hijacked by Reagan, and they were hijacked by George Bush.
Yep.
And the end of the 1980s ends in the unification of the world, but in a dark fashion, as the world unites against Saddam Hussein, right? The 1,000 points of light. And this is when we get the time I got hijacked by that bastard, George Bush and his Illuminati cronies.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at the 1980s, both in terms of its look and feel of Midnight Special and the exact portrayal of Stranger Things, it's going back to that time, which I think is fascinating and interesting. And then you get the two kids. Now, these are kids that are contemporaries of children that are in Pluto and Sagittarius that were born between 1996 and roughly, 2009, which is when Pluto went to Capricorn. These kids are very different than the millennial kids.
Yeah.
You know, the millennial kids are quite dark, and they're very occult driven. These kids that are being portrayed in Stranger Things and Midnight Special are not. They're different. They're a whole different breed. And these Pluto and Sagittarius kids are going to be deeply philosophical, and they're not going to be into the same stuff that the Pluto and Scorpio kids are in, or the millennials are into. So it's a very interesting look at a generation that's moving through time and getting ready to come of age.
Yeah, I think
that's amazing.
That was an amazing wrap up, and I think you're right. And I think I was reading when I was doing research on the Duffer Brothers that Stranger Things will be back for a season 2. So they're, that we don't, it wasn't necessarily an ending. And so what the asterisk is, we remains to be seen. But Robert, I think you just, I looked at some other articles that have been written about Stranger Things, and there was one that was reasonably good by Isaac Weishaupt, but nothing like what you did. I think you just did I think this is one of your best pieces, and I'm looking forward to seeing the third part. What you dropped on us tonight, I was not expecting. So.
Yeah, there's a bunch of people that are looking forward to part 3 of this. I know, because I've been circulating it out, and people are asking. So
kudos to you, man. You nailed it.
Well, thank you. And I got hijacked a little bit by 9/11. So I had to do a piece on 9/11 today. As soon as that's done, we're back in the Stranger Things universe. So
tell us a little, just before we end here, why don't you tell us a little bit about your mind?
It is 9/11 as we're talking right now.
It's 9/11, so tell us about 9/11.
Okay, so 9/11. Yeah, there's a lot going on. I mean, we could do another hour, but we really can't. So here's a fascinating thing, though. I'm going to give you one factoid about 9/11.
Give us a nugget. Yeah.
That I uncovered today. Okay. So when 9/11 happened, Saturn was in the sign of Gemini. So we're talking about duality, right?
Yeah.
The Twin Towers duality, Saturn. Here we go. Gravity taking it down, Saturn, and we have something that's rebuilt out of that duality. Unification, the one world, blah 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 blah. We have the Saturn cube that's submerged. At the 9/11 memorial, it's that square black pond, which is outside of the 9/11. That is a sunken Saturn cube. Okay, that's exactly what that is. So what happened is that Saturn was at 15 degrees Gemini on 9/11/2001. It will return from that position in the year 2030. That's when Saturn goes back into Gemini at 15 degrees, 2030. What do they call the UN initiative?
Agenda 2030.
It's Agenda 2030. That is when Saturn makes a full cycle from where it was on 9/11.
Wow.
30 years later. Right now, we're in the halfway point of that cycle. Saturn opposition Saturn with Saturn in Sagittarius. Now, what's happening is we were supposed to be talking about 9/11. This is where it happens astrologically. during this time, right? During this time. And who comes along and starts talking about 9/11?
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump. Exactly. He hijacks the conversation and starts talking about 9/11 as it relates to the Saudis.
Right.
So here we have Gemini Trump getting involved and basically hijacking what could be a very powerful truth moment with the Saturn opposition. Now, on election night, the day after election night, let's say, hold on, I take that back. It is on the 4th of November, 4 days before the election. Transiting Saturn opposes natal Saturn in the 9/11 chart. It's an exact opposition. It happens 4 days before the election. This is an uncanny sequence and timing that it's very powerful just in terms of its location as it relates to the election. Something's going to happen right around that time that is 9/11 related. Just remember that. It may not be related to 9/11 as it connects to the Twin Towers, but we're looking at the possibility of another 9/11 event during that time, the 4th of November,
Right.
4 days before the election.
And that would be perfect for them because then they could cancel the election or postpone the election, or the event may involve one of the candidates, and they've had these weird reports about what we would do if one of the candidates died and shit stuff like that. So
Absolutely. And by the way, I don't know if you have been following this at all, but George Norrie was at an event recently, and he was talking about the election, and he says, "Well, would it be great if we just had Obama again for another term?" And everybody started cheering, right? So here's George Norrie going out on tour, stumping for another term of Obama. George Norrie, what sign is he? Gemini. Anyway, it's a very, very tangled web that they're weaving. But if we take time, and break this stuff down, we can kind of see what's behind the curtain. I just thought that the 2030 thing was really fascinating, and that's a new factoid.
I think that makes it look okay. So 20 is 9/11. It was the ultimate point of it to bring about something like Agenda 2030. And here we are at the point. And it's at this point that we either have to start going in the other direction, or we're going to end up there in 2030. And Donald Trump is hijacking it, right? So that's the interesting,
Well,
that's
part of the timeline. That's part of the timeline.
Okay.
Can we hack the timeline?
Yeah.
I think the answer is yes, absolutely.
And then just a question, because I don't pay much attention to George Norrie at all, but I thought he didn't like Obama. Now he's stumping for Obama?
Yeah. If you understand, we're looking at George's background. He's got some very, unique associations.
Naval intelligence, first off.
That's right. Absolutely. Yep.
And he also is a defender of Israel and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So George is a good gatekeeper.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
That's all he's good at is gatekeeping. I mean, he's certainly boring to listen to. So
no, he took the legacy of Art Bell and basically put it behind doors and said, "This far and no further."
Yeah, that's it. Absolutely. And he gets well paid for it, even though his ratings are probably about half of what art.
Oh, it's exactly. Yep.
Yeah, and his ratings were apparently even worse than John Wells.
John Wells was very popular, yeah.
John Wells was blowing him out on Saturday night. And, the ratings mean nothing when it comes to coast to coast.
No, because the cabal's financing all of it. Hey, guys.
Absolutely.
We need to tie this up in a bow here, and that bow is basically Robert telling people where he can be found, what he's doing in his different activities. I know you've got a trip to Canada coming up and some other things going on your website. So tell people all about that, Robert.
Yeah, thank you, Randy. I'm going to be in Canada. I'm going to be just outside of Toronto at the end of the month at a little yoga retreat, but I'll be there for a week. So I do private sessions and consultations with people with astrology. I've got an interview coming out very shortly with Regina Meredith on Gaia TV. I think it comes out this week. And I have a 16-hour astrological course. So if you're into what I'm talking about and want to learn more about it, I have it on my website. And I actually have a special going on right now. It's a Mercury retrograde special. It'll be happening until September 22nd. And I'm taking 33% off of my course. It's normally $200.
Of course you are.
It's normally $295, and it's $195, which is 33% roughly. And all you have to do is type in Labor 33 if you're interested in it, and it's a pretty good course. No, it's actually, I think it's a really good course. So that's available, and I do readings and all the other stuff. You can find it at robertphoenix.com.
Robert, thank you so much. I enjoy talking to you always, and maybe you'll come back. Maybe you'll pop back in the week before the election and see where we're at.
Okay, I'd love to be back. You guys are great. I love what you do. You've got such great chemistry, and you're fearless. So thank you for having me on.
All right,
Thanks
guys.
so much, my friend.
We're going to go out to a track in honor of what we just talked about, a track called Hell of the Upsidedown Sinners by the artist Ian Lehman from Assault Audio. See you next time, guys.
And that's going to wrap it up. The truth is out there. It's inside you. There, find it fast. Be back with another show real soon.
All right. Good night, guys.